Hello, and this is the final episode of Season 1 of Notes from the Grey Hill. Over the past 7 episodes, we've talked about why audio theatre matters, how to pay artists fairly, who it serves, and where it fits in with your business model. We've looked at the present, the pressures theatres are under right now, the audiences you're currently losing, and the revenue diversification that, in particularly, the UK sector needs. But in this episode, it's all about the future. Not the next season, not next year. The future that is measured in decades. 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, even 70 years after the people who made the work are gone. Because that's what legacy means. That's what the long tail means. And that's what happens when you capture live theatre and turn it into something permanent. Theatre is ephemeral by nature, right? Performances happen and then they're gone. The unrepeatable moment, the presence of performers in the room, the knowledge that tonight's show will never happen exactly this way again. But it's also about limitation. Once the run ends, the work stops generating income. The set gets struck, the actors move on to other projects, the production disappears. And audio theatre captures something permanent. Not the full experience, of course you can't replicate the presence of live performers sharing space with an audience, but something that retains value. A recording that can be sold, shared, studied and enjoyed for decades, and that can introduce new audiences to a writer's work long after the original production closed. And that can create income for people who made it and for their families for 70 years or more. The decisions you make now about how you capture work, how you structure contracts, how you handle rights and royalties, shape what happens decades from now. Not just for your venue, but for the writers, actors and artists whose work you're making, and for the audiences who'll discover that work long after you're gone. So, let's talk about legacy, translation, and the long tail. Let's talk about what lasts. So let's talk about the long tail. The term long tail comes from economics. It describes products that continue to generate sales over long periods, even if those sales are modest in any given year. So for example, a blockbuster film might make most of its money in the first few weeks of release, but a cult classic keeps earning for decades. You know, a few streams here, a few DVDs there, a few Blu-rays here, shown on television there, which then adds up to a significant income over time. Music works this way also. Books work this way. So, and increasingly, theatre can work in this way too, but only if you capture the work in a format that can be distributed over time. So, live theatre doesn't have a long tail. Once the run ends, the income stops. So you might revive the production years later, but that requires new investment, new casting, new rehearsals, new marketing. The original production doesn't keep earning on its own. Audio theatre does, in a way that you capture the work once during the live run. That recording becomes an asset that can be sold, streamed or licensed for years. It doesn't require new investment. It doesn't need new marketing campaigns. It's there. It's in your catalogue, earning income whenever someone discovers it. And here's what makes this particularly powerful. The royalty structures that govern audio theatre are designed to support long tail income. They're not just about who gets paid in the first year. They're about how are those splits evolved as the work keeps earning. Now note, I did say long-term income doesn't come in theatre. There are some very few examples like Les Mis and Phantom. They're 1 in a million, so this is why I've focused on the long-tail income for most productions in theatre. So we've talked in previous episodes about how audio theatre works as a commissioning model. Whether you're capturing existing productions or starting with audio first to test demand before investing in a full stage production. And that's the practical side of how you make the work. But what happens after the work is made? How does it keep earning? And how do those earnings get split over time? Well, that's where royalty structures come in. The union agreements that now govern audio theatre recognise that there's an upfront investment, commissioning fees, casting, rehearsals, recording, marketing, all of that. And that the investment needs to be recouped before the work becomes profitable. So royalties are structured to balance two competing needs. Need one would be the producers need to recoup their investment, and need two is the artist's right to fair long-term compensation. So what I wanted to do here is just give you how this might work in practice. And in the first phase, let's say until the producer has recouped 150% of their initial cost, the split might be weighed towards the producer. So hypothetically, for an example, let's say that's 70% to the producer and 30% split amongst the creative team. That early return helps offset the risk of commissioning new work. But once the producer has recouped their costs on the production, the split shifts. Maybe it moves to a 60-40 split. Then as the work continues to earn and grosses higher thresholds, it shifts again to 50-50, then 40-60, and eventually maybe 30-70 in favour of the creatives. The exact number depends on the agreement, but the principle is universal. Early returns reward the party that took the financial risk. Long tail income rewards the artists whose work keeps earning decades after it was made. Here's something else worth knowing. Let's give you an example. Let's say you've produced work that nearly breaks even. So when you've added ticket sales and audio income together, you've got some income left over from the live run. There is nothing stopping you as a producer from putting that income towards the recoupment calculation for the audio theatre recording. So why does this matter? Why am I bringing this up? Because once you've reached that first recoupment threshold, say 150% of your initial costs, the royalty split shifts. Everyone starts earning higher percentage in your cast and creatives. So if you use your surplus ticket income to accelerate recoupment, you're also accelerating the point at which the creative team earns more. In other words, live and digital can support each other financially. Surplus from the live run helps you to recoup the audio investment faster. And that means the escalators kick in sooner. So writers, actors, and the creative team start earning higher royalties earlier. The key here basically is transparency. If you're planning to do this, tell everyone involved up front. Make it clear in the contracts and in your conversations before you start. But it's an option, and it's another way that live and digital work together. Not just by reaching different audiences, but by helping each other generate income that benefits everyone involved. And that's basically how the contracts work. And it changes the economics of commissioning new work. For producing houses, this changes how you think about commissioning. You're not just funding a production, you're building a catalogue. So say 6 shows a year become 6 new assets in your library. Some will sell more than others, some will find niche audiences that keep returning, some might break out years later when a writer becomes better known or when the theme becomes newly relevant. But collectively, they're generating income. Not huge sums in any given month, but steady income year after year. And because of the royalty split shifts over time, you're not locked into paying out the same percentages forever. Early recoupment offsets your risk, long tail earnings reward the artists. This is the economic model that makes audio theatre sustainable, not just for one production, but for the whole programme of your work over years. So importantly, it's time to talk about something that we very rarely talk about. What happens when someone dies? So in the UK and EU, copyright lasts for 70 years after the death of the creator. That means a play written today will remain in copyright until 70 years after the writer dies. During that time, the writer's estate, i.e. their family, their heirs, continue to receive royalties from any use of that work. Now, this applies to everyone who holds rights in a recording: the writer, the actors, the director, etc. Anyone whose contract includes royalty participation. So when they die, those royalties pass on to their estate. This isn't an edge case, this is how copyright works, and it's why the contracts you negotiate today matter for decades beyond everyone's career. So why does legacy rights matter? So think about a writer in their 30s who are just starting to make a living from theatre. They write a play, you commission it, you produce it as audio theatre, it sells modestly. A few hundred copies in the first year, then a steady trickle after that. Nothing spectacular, but it's earning. That writer might live another 50 years, and during that time they continue to receive royalties from that recording. It's not enough to live on, but it's a supplementary income. A few £100 a year maybe, enough to matter. Then they die, but the work doesn't disappear. The recording is still available, it's still selling, a few copies here, a few there, and for the next 70 years, those royalties go to their estate, their children or their partner, their grandchildren. So that's 70 years of income from work made in the 30s. That's the long tail at its most extreme, and it only works if the rights are structured properly from the beginning. So if we compare this to live theatre doesn't do this. A writer might earn royalties during the production run. They might earn royalties if the play is revived or if it's licensed to other theatres. But once the play stops being performed, the income stops. So audio theatre, as you've seen there, is completely different. The work is performed once during the original production, but the recording keeps earning as long as people keep discovering it. And because copyright lasts 70 years post-death, that income can span generations. This is particularly important for writers and actors who don't make blockbuster earnings during their lifetimes. A successful playwright might earn well from the West End or Broadway transfers and international licensing, but most writers don't, most actors don't. They make modest livings from a body of work over decades. So audio theatre can give that work a longer shelf life. It doesn't replace the need for fair upfront payment, but it creates a possibility of long-term income that supports families after the original creator is gone. The reason to think about this now, in 2026, when you're negotiating contracts for audio theatre, is because the decisions you make today determine what happens in 2050 or 2070 or 2096. If you negotiate contracts that give artists fair royalty participation, their families benefit for 70 years. If you structure those royalties to shift over time so that producers recoup early and artists earn more in the long tail, you're building a system that aligns incentives and rewards creation. But if you negotiate contracts that don't include royalty participation or that pay flat fees with no ongoing rights, you're cutting off that long tail income, not just for the artists, but for their families decades from now. So this isn't abstract. This is what legacy means. The work you're making today will outlive everyone involved in making it. The question is whether the people who made it and their families benefit from that longevity. So to finish off this segment on legacy, there's a thing that we don't particularly talk enough about in the arts, and that is about estate planning. If you're a writer, an actor, a director, anyone who holds rights in recorded work, you need to have conversations about your estate. So talk to your loved ones, set up a will that clearly states what you want to happen to your work and who they should contact to manage it. Because here's what happens otherwise. For example, a producer wants to license a recording of a play. They need to contact a playwright, but the playwright died 5 years ago. So they try to contact the estate, maybe a son, a daughter, a partner, but that person doesn't understand the business. They don't know what the licensing means or how royalties work or whether they should say yes. So they do nothing and the opportunity is lost. This isn't just a problem for estates, it is a problem for the entire sector. Work that should be available, that should be generating income for families, sits unused because no one knows who to contact or how to navigate the rights. We need to talk about this more. As theatre enters the digital era, families need to understand how royalties and revenues work, not just for megastars who have managers and lawyers, but for working writers and actors whose income comes from a body of work built over decades. Have the conversations now, set up an estate, make it clear who manages your rights and how they can be contacted, and that's how you protect your legacy and your family's income for the next 70 years. So legacy isn't just about time, it's also about reach. And in this part of the episode, I want to talk about translation and global reach. And it's one of the most powerful aspects of audio theatre and how it easily crosses linguistic and geographic boundaries. So for example, a play is written in English, it's performed in a theatre here in Scotland, it's recorded and released as audio. That's a primary production, it's the original work and its original language. But it doesn't have to be the end. Another theatre company working in another language can negotiate the rights to translate and record the work. For example, a Gaelic theatre company might want to record it in Gaelic, a Welsh company might want to record it in Welsh, a Spanish company in Spanish, and so on. Each of those productions is a separate recording serving a different audience. And so this is called a secondary license. The original producer and the writer license the translation rights to another company. That company pays a fee, produces their own recording, and sells it in their territorial markets. For example, it could be Latin America, North America, Spain, or it could be worldwide. The original creator continues to receive licensing income. The translated version reaches audiences who would never have accessed the original copy. So why does translation matter? Well, translation extends the cultural and commercial reach of work far beyond its original production. A play that premieres in Edinburgh might be recorded in Gaelic by the Highlands Company, in Welsh by a Cardiff theatre, and in Spanish by a company in Barcelona, as an example. Each version serves a different audience, each generates income for the original creator, and collectively they make the work accessible to audiences who might never have discovered it otherwise. This is particularly important for languages with smaller speaker populations. Gaelic theatre companies, for instance, face a limited domestic market, but if they can license work that's already been proven successful in English, translate it, and record it, they're able to offer high quality new work to the audiences without carrying the full risk of the original commissioning. And that works vice versa for new Gaelic work getting translated into English. This same logic applies internationally, so a successful UK production might be translated into French, German, Italian, and any other language. Each translation extends the work's reach, each generates licensing income, and each introduces new audiences to the writer's work. Audio makes this easier than physical touring. You don't need to move cast and set across borders. You don't need visas or work permits. You negotiate translation rights. The new company records their version and the work is available in their territorial markets. So here's where legacy and translation intersect. A play recorded in 2026 might be translated into Gaelic in 2028. That Gaelic version might be translated into Spanish in 2032, and because copyright lasts 70 years post-death, those translations can continue to be made and to generate income for decades. The original writer might never have imagined their work being performed in Gaelic or Spanish, but their estates benefit from those translations long after they're gone, and audiences in Scotland, Wales, Spain and beyond get access to work they would never have encountered otherwise. This is what global reach means in the context of audio theatre, not a single worldwide release, but a network of translations and secondary productions that extend the work's life and reach across languages and geographies. So, the final dimension of legacy is community use. Audio theatre doesn't just generate income through direct sales, it also becomes a resource for education, outreach and cultural engagement. Most theatres already run education and outreach departments. They work with young people, community organisations and local groups. Audio theatre extends that work not just by sharing recordings, but also by creating them. Your outreach team could work with young people to create original audio theatre or commission a writer. You can run workshops where participants perform and record new work, capture it and release it digitally, and the people involved have a professional recording they can share. Not only this, it builds skills, creates opportunities and generates work that serves your local community. This could be work with schools, with kinship care groups, with dementia patients, through theatre projects, or with any community that you're already serving. Audio theatre becomes a tool for engagement and a way to preserve the work those groups create. There's also another opportunity here, and that's amateur dramatic societies and young theatre companies who can make audio theatre themselves. Local Amdram groups are always looking for work to perform or create new writing themselves. Either way, they're performing live, but there's no reason why they can't also record those performances and make them available digitally. These are non-profit organisations serving their local communities, and if they capture their productions as audio theatre, they can sell those recordings locally, generate income that supports their work, pays royalties to the writers and everyone involved, and it gives local audiences access to productions they might have missed, or access to local stories that they might have never heard before. Youth theatre companies can do the exact same. They're developing young performers, often working with new writing or devised pieces. If they record that work, the young people involved have professional recordings they can share, and the company generates income that funds future productions. Whether it's new writing or licensed work, local companies can record their own versions. The union agreements ensure everyone gets paid fairly, and communities that might not have access to professional touring productions can still experience high-quality audio theatre made by their local companies. So, 7 episodes, 7 parts of the same argument, and it all comes back to the Theatre in the UK 2026 report that we talked about in episode 6. 36% of organisations expect deficits in 2026, 51% among subsidised theatres. In real terms, ticket prices have fallen 8.9% since 2019, but 91% expect costs to keep rising. The report is clear. Theatres need revenue diversification. And for me, my personal opinion is that audio theatre delivers it, and it's accessible. Some theatres can afford to film productions, that's valuable work, but it's not every venue that can justify the cost of multi-camera filming, lighting for broadcast, and a visual post-production. Audio theatre has a lower barrier to entry. The technical requirements are simpler, the costs are lower compared to film, and it's accessible to producing houses and presenting venues alike. From large subsidised theatres to small community spaces working with local companies. That means more theatres can participate, more work gets captured, more artists benefit from long tail income, and more communities have their work presented and made available. So let's recap what we've covered this season. In episode 1 we talked about why audio theatre, why now, the funding crisis, the audience reach and the business case for capturing work digitally. In episode 2 we discussed audio theatre as a development pathway for new writing, how it fills the gap left by BBC cuts and the collapse of commissioning infrastructure. Episode 3 spoke about fair pay and future-proof contracts, the 5 questions every contract must answer and the union agreements that now make audio theatre viable. Episode 4 was about reaching audiences you're currently losing, rural audiences, disabled audiences, people with caring responsibilities and so forth, and how young people are discovering theatre on their own terms. Episode 5 was starting with one low-risk pilot and how to test the model, gather the data and build confidence before scaling up. Episode 6 was about where audio fits in with your business model, whether you're a producing house or a presenting venue, how audio creates revenue diversification without competing with live ticket sales. And this episode, episode 7, was about legacy, translation and the long tail, and how your decisions you make now shape what happens in 10, 20 or even 70 years' time. Audio theatre reaches audiences you're completely losing. It generates long-tail income that keeps earning for decades. It supports new writing development when commissioning budgets are under pressure. It pays artists fairly through union-approved contracts with royalty structures that reward both early-stage investment and long-term creation. And it keeps money local instead of sending it offshore to global platforms. And it builds cultural infrastructure that lasts 70 years, not 70 nights. This isn't a nice to have, it's a strategic response to the structural pressures the sector is under right now. The Theatre in the UK 26 report shows the problem, and audio theatre is part of that solution. The decisions you make now about contracts, about rights, about how you capture and distribute work, shape what happens in 10, 20, 50 years. Not just for your venue, but for the writers, actors and artists whose work you're making. And for the audiences who will discover that work long after you're gone. That's what legacy means, that's what long tail means, and that's what this season has been about. This is the final episode of Season 1 of Notes from the Grey Hill. In May, I'm heading to Canada to talk to venues there, and I'll be recording a bonus episode while I'm there to see what the differences are between the UK and what we can learn from North America and their approach to audio theatre and vice versa, to see how this model works in an international space. If you found this season helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. And if you want to talk about how audio theatre could work for your venues, whether you're a producing house, a presenting venue, or somewhere in between, even a producer, get in touch with links in the notes below. We're here to help. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate that this is a niche subject, and thank you for your time. And I will see you again in May.